Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Thursday, which means yesterday it was time for a new viewer track review video. Oops. Anyway, if you'd like to have your tracks in one of these videos, pop on over to the Discord and get on up in the submissions channel. Follow the rules, do what the mods say, and maybe you'll have your track in here. It is a random selection process, so don't worry about it too much. In the event, our first track for today is Eternity Keeping On. Let's see what this is like. I like this a lot because it reminds me of that old 90s jungle, because this is straight up that old 90s jungle. It's even kind of mixed like it. And like the only thing that is really bugging me about this is the very blandness of the parts. There's like the parts are all individually great, but what the song mostly seems like is just the combination of the stuff on and off. And I'm acting like that's not what the rest of the jungle was like, and it definitely was, but there was more variation in them in between the bits to make them like the full Prodigy vibe, which is sort of my read and reference for these things, is because this is what it reminds me of. It is very light. It is the kind of light that stuff was, I guess, and frankly, I have nothing totally against any part of this other than just like the length of how it was. But the thing is that staring at this and listening to it directly like this is barely what this music is designed for, and largely is done up like this to aid its use in like being cut up with like 11 other songs of its type. And for that purpose, and for this, like, it's a great groove, it's a great beat, like it is the perfect like pillow of this stuff. So this was like watching Mad Men. It's like a period piece. So good job with that. Yeah, not much else to say about it. Kind of repetitive, but it's not as though I would have done differently too much. I mean, I would have, but then it wouldn't have been this kind of song. That's what would have happened. That tends to happen when I do genres that, who does things in ways like as defined for the genre that are like how I don't like doing things, and then I don't do them, and then it's not the genre anymore. Anyway, this track is Meloeguy, About Us, and that's the middle of the track. This is the beginning of the track of Meloeguy, About Us. So this song is a lot of really interesting ideas that are competing against each other in unhelpful ways, in ways that are probably as you if you listen to this and you feel like it's just so very close to being what it could be, but it's sort of held back in certain ways. I feel that too, and some of the things that are doing that are basically either going too far or not far enough on certain things. The things though are all great. The pillow, I keep using that word, but like the lid, it does feel very, like the purpose of what pads are. It feels padded up with the melodic elements that are behind the hard stuff. All that stuff is excellent. The hard stuff like are good and when they happen and what they are, but how they are is something that's kind of an issue. This big guy, for example, the kick on the main thing, it tends to have its sidechain that goes. It feels like it goes a little too far, kind of more often than not. And it feels like the way that the sidechain was designed around how it is at its hardest moments, and there it works. But when it like at this section, when it comes out, it cuts it a little too hard, in my opinion. Mostly, and this is what I mean by like it has lots of good ideas that are competing against each other. Because the good idea here is the musical elements that are happening in this progression, which are very pretty. And that's true about the rest of the song, is that prettiness isn't really allowed to be its prettiest self because of how hard it's very uniformly being beaten up by the mixing with the drums. Which is like you went to the T, that is how far you go with these things. But there is a like the balance of it is that like there's some consideration for the fact that it is that pretty, which means you probably don't want to go that far with it. The other thing that happens because you have is the way that this kick doofs. So a kick doofing, like when you can tell a kick is a synthetic one, is usually when the fall of the pitch that is what makes a kick is slow enough. Like that is what you can hear is like in there, and that little bit of distortion is this little extra harmonic that showed up. It's basically this thing multiplied up, right? So either the sample is what this sound is, and it sounds like this, and this is what you wanted, or this is a result of how hard you pushed it in your drum mix or your main mix, maybe. But the point is that how busted up it sounds because you've done it doesn't match up well with how well it's fed against the rest of the stuff. And it feels, again, like it pushed a little too far on what it is in comparison to what everything else is like to be with it. Because the timing of the elements is good, the motion of it is all good, how all it feels is good, but how it gets pushed away and the dynamics of it seem like they suffered a little too hard for how you brought it together. But not by much, by percentages. It's pretty close to being pretty dope. Maybe like even this leaving this the way it is wouldn't be that a bad call. Just try maybe for newer things, attempt differently. Next track up is this Counterwav, Suitable Danger. Okay. On your way to Hans Zimming. So, this kind of stuff, when I'm working on it or doing it, usually it's sort of thematic. And I don't necessarily mean that it's on something or for something, but it means that there's something in it that is kind of the point. That is maybe so basically progressing in a way that's this sort of the story you're telling. This track is kind of this sort of piano-y melody thing, right? And pretty much this part of it is the only part of it I'm really sure about. After this, it moves in ways that you expect that it would need to move in that way at that time, but two places that don't totally mesh well, in my opinion. And I don't have a whole lot of answers about how to fix that, or even kind of to even describe what the problem totally is, because this is a theory thing. And I'm mostly saying that this is the issue because I kind of like this sounds like stuff that would have been issues that I did when I was new. And I had no idea how new you are, or this is an issue to you, or this was something that you intended to do. So I'm not going to go that way about it because that might be a little insulting. But around here, though, it starts to become a technical problem in a mixing sense. Ah. And then a little bit again at the end. Keep doing that. I keep doing that. Actually, the ending takes care of it a little bit better. But basically, the technical problem here is that some of the chords you're choosing are creating interesting phase cancellations you can kind of see happening. That's a result of the notes being the notes you chose. That's all. That's the whole reason it's happening. It's less about the sound itself and more those are the notes are causing that particular interaction. And that became, it actually kind of sounds vaguely video gamey. Like it actually feels sort of like what if I had just taken a MIDI straight out of Castlevania and dumped it into the Microsoft MIDI player. Sort of a little bit like what it would sound like. And it's not necessarily a jab. That's because that stuff is pretty, well, renowned nonsense. But when we're doing things that can be mixed that we have control over like that level of mixing, like, because when they mixed that sort of thing that way, it's because they were forced to, not because they necessarily would have chosen to, So I would recommend considering the density of your note choices, and especially this is actually the problem over here that I'm remembering now. I want to look at over here was about the drums, and you have a little bit of the problem with it from pretty much any time they're there, which is that their presence is very overwhelming. And I mentioned Zimming, Hans Zimmer, and that might be a little over the top more than what this sort of thing would do, but he does have a lot of those like simple main lead theme things that get turned into epic stuff. And the way in which it does that is pretty much these parts, is that it gets bolstered by some strings and some instruments and some drums. And the drums are pretty impactful, but they're not necessarily that loud. And this track has drums that are loud, and it's sausage even. Like it's actually a pretty decent mix for the drums. It's just that the musical elements are pretty quiet at this element because of it. And it's a bit hard to make them be hit that hard. Make them be hit that hard. I want that to be a t-shirt. Yes, make them be hit that hard. And then you can zim it up. I swear I'm a professional. Anyway, otherwise, good sort of musical experience, and it does progress into sort of like story-esque fashion, which is really what I look for in this sort of stuff, and what I love about more kind of orchestra and like especially piano-focused stuff that ends up and goes towards epic. It's a flow that I agree with. This next track I have is called Soul Jamz by Gearhead. Start at the beginning. It did. Ooh, damn though. afraid I was long. So this was a tight track. I go, good lord, like everything is so cut and on and tight. It's just that. That's what this track is. This is tight, the track. Good ass job. Except the bit crush on this lead, that was too much. That is way too loud for how high up that is. Like, this isn't even like about peaking or being like up at MP3 level or anything. Like, this is just that's just too much level for that frequency. It's a neat touch. It makes it feel cool. Like, I like the texture it makes. It's just turn it down by like 3 dB. You know, that's still going to be kind of loud. I would like half it, 3/4 it. It's insane how loud that is. And like, I think you even feel like you knew how loud it is because you come in here and you put this guy. That was a nice touch. What you did with it, what's happening in the song, like, it is so good. It is so well done up and orchestrated. And the rhythm on this cut and the sample work, I don't know if you made the samples or just did that or if they did that. I don't care. You made this come out this way, and it worked. It worked out good. Except for the part where, like, look how bright that is. Look how very extremely sharp that frequency is. I was looking at this the whole time, like how high up and how even. It's impressive how well balanced it is for being that loud, but still too much. Next track up, Cod Fish by YG13, and look at this. I am curious, and we're about to have answers. That's how long that was. Okay. I assume this part is like a B part you haven't written yet. I like the main riff on this, the main sound. It has just the right amount of squish texture to it in the right areas. You know what I mean? The rest of it is pretty good. Like, this intro I could take or leave. I could take or leave most intros. But what this is, okay, I will say this sub is so very low that, like, I'm mousing over this and middle range of it, 30 something hertz or whatever note that is, C sharp. So, okay, so what systems are that for? Sub packs, I guess. I couldn't hear it. This is all there is to that. I don't know, levels wise, nothing about this offended me too much. Like, after it's also like a pretty good example of what, like, you pretty well know what you rhythm this out like ahead of time before you establish like the bass riff. So like that, look, you know where you're going with this, and I will tell you that you're doing where that is good. Yeah, so many t-shirt ideas today. Okay, that was a short track. Next track, New Dawn by Zyphic. Zyphic, it's terrific. it's just off. Okay. That was a lot of fun. I like how big and epic this was. This actually has a lot of good examples of some things to talk about a lot, including something like the 2-voice theme. The idea that, like, everything about a track can be extrapolated just from having a low note, like what your low end key is per bar. So, like, this isn't exactly your bass line, but this is like the notes that your bass line would follow. And then you have a lead line that is also a bunch of notes that, like, determine what, like, the cage of your scale is for every other activity that happens. So here comes this other item, right? This ARP that's playing a chord that is not the chord that's being made out of here, but it's relative to it. It's harmonic to it. It has to sound good with it because that's what was there before. And that's sort of what I mean by that, is that it ends up governing what the rest of your song is. And there's a bit of a trap and a danger of that, though, which is sort of what the song does, which is that after a while, there's only so many ways you can do the same thing. And the ways are cool, like cutting out and having the sparseness of it, coming in with the epic and the bigness and that kind of thing. Lots of neat stuff to do with that. But when I do this sort of thing, if I'm cognizant of it, if I'm not lazy enough, what I'll do is the second time through, I'll add in a third kind of lead layer. That's kind of like a 2.5 voice theme, where there's the 2-voice theme, but then there's like this third part that works with it. It's not an ARP, it's not a chord, not a different deal. It's a whole other lead line. I did this in the second half of Codename Hurricane, just as a reference. So other than that, the mixing in this is strange. The musical elements when they're there for themselves are excellently portrayed, and the bass drop bits are also, I guess, okay, good. I say I guess because there's a problem here, which is that when this comes in here like this is way too isolated high frequency and much too big a hole in the mid, considering how much we've just been trained on. Literally the opposite. And then we have the same problem again later coming out of it. But the other problem with this is that I noticed that when this was going, that I felt a certain sort of lack of presence that you basically solved by layering in the rest of the elements that were there for the rest of this drop, which tells me that a lot of the reason this is the way it is because it was mixed to sound good here, which is fine, except that while you are being trained on this because you're hearing it and moving and working on it, the listener is trained by this. So when we get here and we hear this, this is too much of what it is as the sound. And it really is like the weakest link of this track, because the other elements, especially coming over here, like this second drop was awesome. The middle bits are so clean and so well cut up, and like the basses are powerful and cut and nice, and this main thing just doesn't carry it. And like also the fading in on it here was also excellent. The choices of when and how much were all great. Like the balance and the feel on that stuff was awesome. I was just real curious that like I definitely feel what like sort of the point was, which was to go like big and wide on the sort of the orchestra stuff, and then have like a almost not necessarily full big room-esque, but a kind of weighty sparseness come in to fill it in with also big airy things, but lighter than the orchestral stuff, and that's fine. Just not this light, not this big a hole in comparison. Like, because this is good. You notice like this fill in here as it gets there, it does actually start to fill in with this mid-range stuff, and it doesn't feel as empty. Although, and when this happens, this is too much of a contrast, because you see this is like the opposite land happening. I can see why you chose to keep them separate, but it is also a fun concept, and we see this in just popular stuff all the time, but you just switch it out with the main stuff. Where either there's this contrast, but it's because it actually goes back and forth between it and the drop, and not just stays on one and the other, so we don't get like too much of either, or get trained by one to feel like the other is now wrong, even though there's nothing wrong with it. There's not really a lot wrong with this distribution. Even if I heard a song that was basically just this the whole way through, I'd probably still say it was top heavy. But now it's like egregiously top heavy, especially because we've been trained on otherwise. But epic was epic. It got a little long in the tooth with just what this progression was near the end there, but other than that, it felt good. I would have done the intro long, fully being aware that I've done songs with longer intros, but I don't really do those anymore, do I? Anyway, next track we have Johnson's Times Like These. Wow. His name is actually in the title, in the file. I don't know why Edison, how selective Edison is in this filing system. Okay, here we go. Interesting. I wonder what which note that off one was, or that one was the others. The tones and textures in this track were awesome. Pretty much from beginning to end, the atmosphere of it was just very good. I have almost no problems with this when it comes to the mix. My only real issues with it are basically just stylistic and content type. Like, I'm not a big fan of how these drums work, in terms of like being the same hit like the whole time. The beat is sick, like with the playing and on the hats with like every so often with the trilling on the drums. There was a moment that were a good one, couple, yeah. Like those were fun deal, and like the synthy arps with like the also synthy keys, but like slightly more realistic texture on the keys, but not like the textures and this are awesome. It wasn't terribly loud or pushed super hard, but it like felt good, and also felt like this is sort of, it's hard for this content, you know what I mean? Like when we hear a metal song, we can hear a metal song that redlines and think to ourselves, this is light, it's smooth and easy listening, and some other metal song that like, you know, hits a little harder into specific ways that we like to expect in loudness, but like, you know, literally they're on the same level. And that's just because that there's ways that particular content are expected, even though like the quiet versions of that content are still so much louder than like an Eric Clapton track. Like that kind of, like, this sort of stuff has a texture and a weight to it, and it's expected, like, the way that the style goes. And this is sort of like the high end of hard for that style, and at least in my imagination of it. And it's the sense of the older versions of it. Like, I have a hard time listening to, like, the Eric Clapton, the older stuff, because it doesn't, like, hit the way that modern textures do. And, like, it's not just about, like, the loudness of levels and things like that. It's also about how clean individual stuff can be and still be as loud as they are. That is something that is a very modern power, and it comes across when, like, a whole song can be made out of things that can be that clear, and it sounds a way that the old stuff just does not, for basically that one reason. But it does have this excellent texture, usually as a result of that is hard to pull off with the modern stuff, also because of this. Because it like, when we bemoan the fakiness of samples, and it's mostly because of how perfect it is, and the imperfections are what causes textures to be a thing. So it's pretty difficult to make an imperfectly good sounding, like, textural experience that also hits in a modern and real way. And because of why we hear that texture, like, if the reason for it is because of the old limitations, and we don't have those limitations, and then that's why it's not there anymore, then the balance is difficult. And this was a good one. Good job, Dat. Next track we have FADENT with their track Love Cry 109. Literally the letter O, 9. Here we go.
Let the waves take you on, but you won't go.
God damn. That was a lot of awesome and a lot of like just almost awesome.
Are you ready?
All this amazing. This section, it's fine. Like the only thing I would say is that kick could be hit a little deeper, because some of these other elements that when they whip, like they end up hitting harder and deeper than the kick does, because of the way that they move around. If the kick moving around is coming down like that is what makes a kick happen, then when a thing moves around kind of like it but higher than it, then all of a sudden the kick is not the high thing. Same thing with the snare, but the snare's tippy-tappiness with the sidechain is a little bit the point, ain't it? So like with it, just increase the side and the hit and just up the levels just a little bit more, and it'll feel right to me. But if this feels right to you, then I'm not gonna complain. Like this is excellent, a show of work. But let's talk about the work, because the buildup of this, the depth of alteration just in the intro that you did, these little transition moments, is like, it implies some stuff that's coming, you know what I mean? And then all of this gold, this is fine, and the buildup, amazing. And then the drop at the very beginning, all that great, and then it kind of tapers off a bit, and then you don't do a second drop. This needed to be in the next drop, and it needed to be this and more. And I think you knew that. I think you know exactly what needs to happen here. And like, I don't totally blame you for going this way and like doing the in and out kind of deal. Which again, if this feels right to you, don't even bother listening to what I'm saying. That because this is a feat. But the feat and the work that I keep wanting to talk about is that like every individual thing in here, if taken at its super basic, most individual self, can be thought of as being trivial, but the not trivial thing is stuffing a track full of this nonsense and like having it come out, because it's one thing to say, cool, do this again but better, and then it's a whole other thing to actually be like, oh my god, dude, oh my god, like to manually make it happen, because that's how you do this stuff, is you manually make it happen. And you either have in your head an idea of how the beat's going to go, or it's a lot of trial and error, and it makes doing this sort of thing super unattractive a prospect for yourself, right? So, again, if this is your vision, it's a dope vision. This even if this wasn't a vision, if this was like a hardcore accident that just tumbled into this reality, like, good. I, again, like previously, don't care because however it is you made this to be a thing. Like I always want things to hit harder and have the kick and the snare be louder, but like that's a default opinion on my part on most songs. I talk about that second thing though because, like, at a certain point, a lot of an early career and being a producer is about finding the efficient ways, the smart ways to not work harder but to work smarter, because the pace of what being a professional is as such that you don't really have time to do this. Because, like, yeah, we could all be Pixar if we had, like, 3 years to devote to sitting in front of a computer and animating things by hand. Like, if that's what we were doing, sure, you know, they're better at it and they have more talent and experience or whatever. But the whole point is that actual working, touring, musical content creators don't have the time to sit around and, like, knit every pixel. So the whole most of what music technology has been about making the process more efficient and easier so that more epic and better and cooler things can be done with less effort and certainly less time. And for the most part, the education is just learning what those things are, what the technology is, because you want to do it the way that the other people did the thing that you thought was cool. And the way that they did it is interestingly less than the way you can do it, because time has passed since it's occurred. But then there gets to be a limit, though. A limit where no amount of smartness, no amount of using glitch, no amount of that is going to, like, proceduralize your way into what you know is the result that you want. That you know, like, how do you think Aphex Twin writes his stuff? Like that's what this sort of stuff is. So it's like if you were daring to go this far into making these kinds of statements, we have to say the whole paragraph. But I keep saying all that stuff, but like, this is just such a good thing. Like this track is so good. I'm very on board with a lot of the choices that are in there. So good ass job. All right, that was the last track for today. If y'all have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. Hit up the Discord if you want to submit tracks. And as usual, have a nice day. Yeah.